And we're back. This is the Colombia Calling podcast. I am Richard Mccoll, your host here in Bogota. My very special guest, two-time guest on the podcast, Alvarez, writer, journalist, all-round great conversationalist. Welcome back on the Colombia Calling podcast.
Thank you for having me back. Thank you for acknowledging that conversation is a skill, and it's a dying art form, I believe, also.
I think it maybe is, or at least it's evolving in the dreadful way that we now have sloppy, let's say, WhatsApp conversations and so on. And that began with emails, didn't it? Sloppy emails without punctuation, capitals, and the like.
No, nobody uses punctuation anymore. They just use emojis.
I don't really like emojis, I have to say. And when I was, this is a nice drop for myself, way back in the day when I worked for Newsweek. So this is a long time ago, before grey hair and before children, marriage and everything.
Oh, goodness.
In fact, these are the wilderness years in London, as I refer to them. There was a telephone company incorporating emojis into their data, and yet it didn't catch on. And I remember speaking to them and they were like, we're changing language. And so this is like 2001. Or 2000, in fact. And they were like, we're changing language. We're changing the way. And so instead of writing happy birthday and, sort of talking about a cake, you would just send the image of the cake with the candles. And I was just like, I remember being, that was like, wow, that is interesting, but not really interested.
Well, there's a Doctor Who episode in which I'm a Doctor Who fan. There's a Doctor Who fan in which in the future, language has been replaced by emojis, and the way that you interact with machines and things, like you go to the bank teller and the bank teller will tell you in emojis, money, happy, frowny face, and you just put those. I had a wonderful image of you in the wilds of West End London, like with a machete and a hat.
The wilderness years.
Yes, the wilderness years.
It is an urban jungle, I guess.
I guess.
Although the Newsweek office was in Mayfair, so it was okay. I mean, it was two blocks.
Oh,
off
Muffin! It's so hard being you.
2 blocks.
How you must have suffered.
It was in the attic, my office. It was way up in the attic of one of those old buildings. It was pretty cold, but I didn't really suffer.
I mean, it's Dickensian.
It was Dickensian, and I used to ride on a bicycle, and people would the office had frowned on me for riding a bicycle. I can't even remember why, but my parents had their first ever date only 2 blocks from where I worked. So but that's back in the 70s.
That's adorable.
Yeah, so there's all these stories come together. I may have worn a bushwhacker hat in the rain. There was no machete, though.
Well, I mean, it's called headcanon, Richard. It's a thing. I can imagine whatever I want.
True. I like your idea. I like the idea. We're both in Bogota, but I like the idea that you've imagined me in the West End with a machete and the wide-brimmed hat. That's cool. I like the idea of that too. But Angela, we had you on many months ago, and we were talking about it was a youth book, right? It was a young adult book.
It was a young adult book, yes.
Yes. I remember it. I read it. Of course I read it. How did that go?
That book was a groundbreaking book. It was called Unbound: Stories of Transformation, Love, and Monsters, and it came out during the pandemic. And because it came out during the pandemic, the editors, 5 Points Press, decided to release it free on digital. And because it is a young adult book, and because much of the stories were written by and have LGBTQIA plus themes in them, the decision was made to make this book accessible because we figured that of all the people in the pandemic, LGBTQ plus youth was probably in need of stories the most, because a lot of these kids are in homes that are not supportive, and part of their outlet is books that they get from the library at school or from the public library, because they can't afford, or they don't want to be seen at home with these books, or they don't have access to these books, or their parents aren't giving them the books. So we decided to make this book free to download on across all digital platforms, precisely thinking of those. In fact, LGBTQ plus books are the ones most frequently stolen from libraries.
Really?
Yes, I think that record, at least until recently, that record was held by Juno Dawson. I think her book is one of the most stolen books ever, which she should be proud of that, because it means that she's filling a void in the lives of many people, and she's awesome. I bought her book, but I can totally see why somebody who couldn't get one would need that. And hers is, I think, the most stolen book in the English language, at least until recently.
Wow. See, I've always thought that,
From libraries, and I'm not condoning theft. I'm not condoning theft, which is why we made the book free to download. I'm just saying that there is a void in the lives of many people, and that we were aware of that, and that's why we made it free.
I like this. I also would have liked your book to have been one of the most stolen from libraries, because it would have been a great catchline on a book, wouldn't it? But I also think that certainly in Colombia terms, there's a whole lot of pirating books, and you go downtown and they're all down there on the blanket downtown and stuff. You've made it if your book turns up there.
It's a badge of honor.
So yes. I've been hoping that one day something I write shows up on a blanket downtown, and I can just chat to the guy selling it. I wouldn't mind. I don't think.
No, it's a thing that you asked. Now, Richard, have you been published? Better yet, I've been plagiarized.
Yeah, I've been pirated, and the word pirate is so evocative and visual. So
it goes well with the machete and the hat and the West End battlefield that was your wilderness years. We're building up quite a character.
The wilderness years. Back to the wilderness years again. I told you all that it's a great conversationalist. I told you. I didn't really need to prepare for this podcast, but I have got some stuff down.
Oh, yay.
We segue in. And so congratulations on the book. Congratulations on the story that you wrote. That is very cool indeed that it is now out there and of course, free for those who most need it. I think that's a really cool thing indeed. But I want to say, you've started a new podcast.
I did.
It's been several months now. It's called When Home is a Foreign Word. So you're sort of talking about Colombians overseas and those of us immigrants to Colombia, because I know I've been on it, but it's not out yet.
No, because it comes out every other Wednesday. So I have, me rinde más. I can make it last longer because, you put out episodes with much more freedom. And besides, you do news mostly. I do stories. So I don't have the same urgency that, something has to be happening. But yeah, I just today is Wednesday. Today was the 11th episode. It dropped today.
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right.
So yes, it's foreigners living in Colombia and Colombians living abroad.
All right. There's
At
a
least
lot
in
of
this
us
first
here.
season.
And a lot of them Colombians overseas.
There's more of those.
Yeah.
There's more of those. At least in the first season, I'm focusing on Colombians living abroad and foreigners living in Colombia. I don't know what season 2 will bring, but it's an exploration of what home is and how you find one and how you make one and how to know if you've reached it. It's a very character and story driven podcast because I really like to talk to people and I just like to give people a platform to tell their stories.
Yeah, I see. I mean, when we talked, and I've listened to several of the episodes, I listened to Peter Dale's wife, I can't remember her name, who is a great talker.
Leal.
Yeah, she talks.
She's amazing.
And she's been to Montpos, where I obviously have my interests and so on. And she loves staying at our hotel because my staff talk. And they couldn't do their work because she talks so much. And so we have to sort of sit down there because she is a great conversation.
She's amazing.
And she's been twice to Montpos. And once when she wasn't staying, she still came round to talk.
She is one of those people who lights up in the presence of others. She really does.
And of course, and then you've had, God, his name is
your compatriot, Vincent.
That's it, Vincent.
Vincent Pollard.
Who has been on the podcast many years ago when he was doing the book, The Gangster of Cocktails.
Yes.
And Selva Gin, of course. But
the book
really
Behind Bars.
Too. Yeah, Behind Bars, that's it. He's really interesting. Called. I haven't listened to that one. I should, because we've never met in person, but we talk a lot.
Neither have we, Richard.
It's true, we haven't, but I feel like we've met. I feel like we've met.
There's always a screen between us, but it's still,
Well, it's more like right now. Well, I mean, this will go out after, well, hopefully after the blockades are lifted, or before. My kids are at home. There's a paro camionero, so there's a blockade with trucks and so on. They're complaining about the rise in diesel, and the taxi drivers have joined it because they're complaining about the platforms, and the motorcycle drivers are complaining. I don't really know what they're complaining about, but they're complaining. So everyone's joined up, and so your son is at home. My sons are homeschooling. I'm having flashbacks from COVID. One day, when this is lifted, maybe we could meet in the middle.
That would be amazing. Yeah, Colombians, there's no such thing as a lonely soapbox in Colombia. If somebody somebody starts protesting, everybody like, oh, I want to protest too.
Yeah, why not? Why not? We are obviously, it's Colombia. We live a very privileged lifestyle, and we have a cleaning lady who comes in, but it's now taking her hours to come in. We were joking yesterday that she was going to do it teletrabajo. She was going to virtual work as well.
We are this close from that technology, but she could program it from home. She can program your Roomba from home.
Is that the one, the Hoover that goes around on the floor?
Yes.
Yeah, what do you call it? A vacuum cleaner that goes around on the floor. I've always thought about having one of those.
We got one during COVID, and my husband baptized it Esperancita because it said it rekindled his hope for humanity. It gave him hope.
I thought about it. You see, but everything is connected, isn't it? I mean, we could program our washing machine on our phones. There's an app for our washing machine. I thought, what is the need? I could walk 2 meters. It's just there. It's just behind me. My office is what would be the maid's room. So behind the laundry.
Mine too. I'm in my living room now because there's this thing.
I was going to say there's a fireplace behind you. That can't be the maid's room.
No, my current office, my desk. Office is a bit pretentious. My desk, the writing surface that I use, is currently in the living room, because I don't know if you've noticed this thing. A lot of people don't notice it. A lot of people in Bogota have never actually seen it. There's a thing called the sun. Have you heard of this?
Well, that thing just there, it's bright.
It's rare. It's rare. A lot of people haven't seen it. But that thing, apparently there's a connection between that and warmth. Oh. And so I was
pretty hot in here.
I was freezing my butt off in the other place, so I came here where I could actually, catch secondhand warmth, because I don't get direct sunlight, but it's a little bit warmer here because I was freezing.
Mine's an oven back here. It's an oven,
really?
And I've closed the windows, and I didn't need to close the windows. I closed the windows for sound quality, but of course there are no trucks, taxis, or motorcycles today, so it's actually a lot quieter.
It's quiet where I live now, but when my son was small, we lived on 116th. So his first words were "Dele mono, dele dele, dele
dele." I think my son's, one of them might have been Rappy.
Okay.
His first word. So because it was I think the younger one, because it was COVID, and of course we did rely on the Rappy delivery service. We are digressing, which is great, but so tell me about When Home is a Foreign Word. When is the first? When will the first season come to end? You've done 11. How many have you decided
I've
will
done
be a
11.
season?
I was aiming for 13, which is like the idea, the number that I had in my head, that's what I needed to do. But I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun. I may do a longer season.
Yeah.
Well, I've published 11 episodes, but I've recorded more than that. I was aiming for 13 because that was sort of the idea, that I had 13 episodes per season. But I think that I'll just keep going. I don't know how many episodes the first season is gonna go. A lot of people are telling me for the second season that I should do people that went and came back. So people that lived abroad, rehomed rehomed people. A
That's
season
an
of
interesting.
repatriated.
Yeah,
I might go there. I'm not really
that's
sure
interesting.
because the exploration is the conversation is so much bigger than just nomads and wanderlust and migration. Every episode is a Pandora's box. Every episode it opens up a can of worms that we're like, wow, I had never really thought about this. Right now, a conversation that I'm having a lot is about cultural identity and national identity as opposed to nationality. And this is a concept that a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around. So it's this idea that, well, you're from where you were born. It's a very simplistic view. And like, no, actually, it's more complex than that. Because you can be, the circumstances of your birth don't determine where you find your affinity. But then we also have phenomenons like cultural appropriation where people think, well, I can just cherry pick and be whatever I want. Like, no, that's actually not it either, but it's really complex. It's hard to define, it's one of those things where I think more conversations need to be had because the more global the world becomes, the more we're going to run into these people that maybe have more than one, their cultural identity is a bit of a hodgepodge, and that's okay too. And we need to hold space for people whose identity is a complex issue. And identity in any of the spheres, sexual identity is complex, national identity is complex, cultural identity is complex. We are complex beings. And I think that the simplistic view of, well, your passport tells you where you're from and that's all you need to know. Actually, no, there's more to it than that.
That's it. I love this because home for me is Colombia. I am not Colombian. And I'm not saying that as if it was a negative.
No.
I'm not Colombian. I love it here. I assimilate, but I'm not Colombian, and that's fine. I am resident in Colombia or immigrant to Colombia with British roots. Although, what do I have in common as being from London with, let's say, someone from Manchester? Very little. And yet my background, my forebears all the way back are obviously Scottish. And when we went there some years ago, I felt so comfortable. So there's all these different things. There's all these different things that come up.
Yeah. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more people are going to find in themselves, actually, your wife has roots in Mompos, but she wasn't born in Mompos. But then the people from but her children are Bogotanos, but her husband is British. And so you as a family are like this blend. And if your children had to pick out like a single thread, it might be hard for them. And more than that, I think the next step in that conversation is, what's the point of trying to limit that? And why are people trying to police that? I think that
they definitely feel more Colombian. There's no doubt about it.
Sure, but if they were going to compare,
fair-skinned and immediately stand out in other places and look like gringos. So, yeah.
And the way they're treated and what is expected of them, and those things shape who you are. The way people, the interactions with others. And I think that the first step in all of this is to understand that humans are reliable narrators of our own experience. And the first thing we need to do is listen to people when they tell us who they are, instead of trying to label people for our own comfort.
I'm writing that down. Humans are reliable narrators of their own existence.
Yeah.
Did you have that written down? Because it's amazing.
I do now. You can send me a picture.
I think it's an incredible thing to come off. The idea of coming back, I think, is incredibly...
Actually, credit where credit is due. I actually heard, if not that word for word, something very similar from a creator named Kat Black.
I don't know.
She's amazing. Oh, she's very cool. She's very cool. She has a YouTube channel. Her name's Kat Black. She's very cool. Very highly recommended.
There are arguments in every way, but I have seen a few coming back, and there's the assimilation coming back as well. But there's also the benefits of coming back. Obviously, the benefits of being away, and you weigh all of these up, don't you?
Yeah, it's a phenomenon. I grew up. We arrived in Colombia when I was 10. So I was, a child in the 80s, a teenager in the 90s. And I was a young woman when we had what we call the Colombian exodus, the diaspora in the Pastrana years, where in the late 90s, hundreds of thousands of Colombians left Colombia. And then they started coming back in later years with their families. So these are people who left as young professionals or as young people to find their fortunes. Many of them married abroad and then came back in the early aughts, 2010s, like pre-COVID. We started seeing this phenomenon of people coming back. They made a little bit of money elsewhere. They gained a little bit of a world. That's not a saying that translates well, but yeah, they broadened their horizons.
Tiene mundo.
See, they broadened their horizons, and they brought that with them, and so they came to invest into with startups. Then COVID hit, and now we have this idea of people leaving again. So it's like waves. So yes, people come and go. Most of the people that I've spoken to, though, have this yearning in their hearts. It's a complex relation, and I think that there are many things that lead you to leave, many things that lead you back. It's a different experience for everyone.
I have a friend, an English friend, who lived here a long time and went back, took his family back for education purposes because they were living in Villeta. Because both his kids he's married to a Colombian, but both his kids are fluent in English and they were failing English at the school. They were failing English due to the way the nuns decided that the English class should be, rather than, So he just said, listen, this is it. And they went, and he was very successful back in England. He opened up coffee shops that became renowned in various areas and is selling up to then come back to Colombia. He's like, we're done. I want to come back. And his older daughter, the oldest child, obviously was 10 or 11 when they went back. So in adolescence, she hasn't fit in England and wants to come back. But he is the most keen. The dad is the most keen to come back and gets, really stuck into new projects. So really fascinating.
Yeah. Constanza, precisely, who you mentioned a bit, had a wonderful phrase that she said, children exist in a state of perpetual foreignness. Children are always foreigners. And it is it's a wonderful way of looking both at foreignness and childhood because, when you're a kid, you just got here, wherever here is, you just got here. You don't know anyone. You don't know how things work. You don't have the language. You need someone to show you around. It's confusing. You miss, the comfort of the world you knew. And if you couple adolescence, which is, this foreignness, because you're still a child, your body is growing, but your mind is still very childlike in the early years of adolescence. If you couple that with actual foreignness, if you couple that with I'm actually in a different country, it can be really daunting. It was my experience with myself and my sisters when we came to Colombia. And it was weird. It's the reason I started the podcast. And it's a lot of my characters tend to be fish out of water precisely because of my own experience. Because when I was in the United States, I knew that I was Colombian. This wasn't something that I hid. But people don't usually clock me as foreign in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm pale. I have this vampire look and I'm fair-haired and I'm blue-eyed. And so it was something that I had to tell people about myself. I'm Colombian because I wanted this to be front and center because I didn't want to find out after a while that this was going to bother them. I wanted to know right up front. So being Colombian was something that I had to work into the conversation often. And so I knew that I was Colombian. And the fact that I didn't fit in, I always chalked up to the fact that I was foreign, that I wasn't there. I wasn't a real, quote unquote, I wasn't a real American. But then when we came to Colombia, I didn't fit in either. It was this weirdness.
If I'm not wrong, you were in Minnesota.
We lived in Minnesota for a while. So I was 3 months old when my parents moved. My father was a diplomat. He was a consul to the Colombian government. And we came back when I was 10. So we lived in Minnesota for a few years, and then we lived in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay. So Minnesota and Georgia are so different from each other that they might as well be different countries.
Yes. I could see you fitting in Minnesota as a sort of offspring of Scandinavians. I mean, you do, don't you?
I still can get lost in a polka. I still really
Atlanta's a
appreciate a
whole
good
other story.
tackle shop and get really excited on Oktoberfest.
What I have a question for you. This
Go ahead.
podcast, because I think you've also interviewed, I think, one of your sisters, or maybe both of them, but I've listened to one of them with one of your sisters, and it seems to me that this is also quite cathartic for you.
It absolutely is. This has been on my mind for a while. I wanted to have a podcast for a while. I think when we spoke, I told you I want to be like you when I grow up. I mean, I think I'm older than you, but still.
I don't know. I've got more grey hair, I swear. Look, that's COVID hair.
Okay. I mean, it's not a contest, but I've worked in radio as a journalist, and I absolutely love the medium, and I love it.
Me too.
And I wanted to do something, and I didn't really have a handle on what I was going to talk about. And this actually started as a conversation with my mother, and she was going to be my first guest. But unfortunately, my mother died in February of this year.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you very much. And I was at a crossroads. I was like, do I continue doing this sort of in her honor, or am I going to be able to pull this off? Am I going to cry in every episode? Which, fair enough. I've cried in a few. But that was the idea. Then I said, well, if I can't interview my mother, I'm going to interview my sisters and my dad. Because my mom was the OG nomad. My mother was born in Pereira. She lived in Bogota as a small child. Then my grandfather was named consul, and they lived in Miami during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So my mother had that whole experience growing up. And then when she was a teenager, she moved to London, and she lived in London. I saw her. I went to London last year. She made me go to a place called Carlisle Mansions in Kensington to take pictures.
I know
of
exactly
the place.
where it is. I know exactly where it is.
That's right there, right near the tube station. My mother was there. My mother was at a Beatles concert.
Is that Kensington High Street?
It's
Carlisle?
yes.
Because I grew up next door to it, next to the tube station, right there in
right there.
On Wrights Lane. My mother had a flat there. It was no heating, nothing.
There you go.
I lived there for a long time. I know exactly.
My mother lived there with the Hennessy, with Bertie Hennessy and the Hennessy sisters, and I grew up hearing all about London. My mother's in a Beatles concert. In fact, I'll get up and show it to you if you want. I have an autographed record signed by Ringo Starr. I will show you right now.
No.
Yes, I do. Because my mother went to their concert wearing boots that were 2 sizes too small for her feet, but she needed to wear them because they were absolutely important. And check it out.
Oh, wow. Look at that. So now you're the second person to show something awesome in the background. The first was an author who had her 100 Years of Solitude signed by Gabo.
Oh, I had actually, I had an alpargata. Then Gabo had the other one. But that's a different story.
So you know what? If she was there and my mum in those periods, they might have crossed paths because my mum was very much a part of the swinging 60s.
So after
she was
that,
friends with the Rolling Stones.
Well, okay, no, my mother was not that, but she did get hit on by British royalty.
Oh, which one? Andrew.
Oh, and my mother was in. I'm going to mess this up, and I apologize ahead of time. I can't remember if it was Princess Anne or Princess Margaret, but one of them had a birthday, and I have the newspaper clipping. My mother was invited to her birthday at St. James's Palace, and she was actually the one that presented a bouquet of flowers to the princess, and there was the something and Sullivan.
Gilbert and Sullivan
thing where they were doing a broadcast, and she knocked over one of the microphones. She almost passed out. She was so embarrassed because it was her birthday. It was her 18th birthday, and she made the press in London. There was a whole big article saying that the daughter of a Colombian diplomat was in London, and she had been chosen to go to St. James's Palace, and she offered a bouquet. I forget which one of them it was because her birthday was the same birthday as somebody famous, and she gave the princess the bouquet of flowers. It was the whole thing. No, she was, and I don't know which was the count or the duke or whatever who hit on her, but she told that story And then after that, she went to live to Switzerland. And then after Switzerland, she came back to Colombia. And then after that, we moved to the United States. So she moved around a lot. And so the idea of home being this patchwork of places that you carry with you in your heart, started with my mom. And this whole podcast began like, I want to explore this with you because my mother, till the day she died, had tea. And and her accent, despite living in the United States for a long time, her accent was very Britishy. Mm-hmm. And she would say things like lift and loo and bike. And she felt British. And it was
I am so happy about this. Because obviously everyone wants to talk like me. They're the great British. Your mother had her wilderness years in London.
She did. And since neither one of them can confirm or deny, we can establish that our mothers were friends.
Yeah. So Princess Anne, I just looked it up, was born in 1950. So it would have been her 18th birthday. Because Princess Margaret would have been born sort of just prior to World War II, I think.
I don't remember which one. It was probably, and that she gave the bouquet of flowers to. My mother is. She knew the story better, and there is a newspaper clipping. I don't have it on me. I was not prepared. What
was your mother's full name? I'm going to look it up because I've got access to old newspapers.
Her name was Olga Lucia Vélez Sierra. I don't know if they put the whole Olga Lucia in there, but it would have been Olga Vélez.
Doesn't matter.
Olga Lucia Vélez, and I think it was the London Times, but I'm not sure. But I'll look it up.
I have a subscription to like old newspaper type
and
thing.
And the heading was like Pretty Olga Vélez or Pretty Olga Lucia Vélez celebrates her 18th birthday in London.
It's amazing. And the other thing I'm liking here is what an incredible life she had, and they definitely they crossed paths. Let's just make this up there. I think it's what wonderful memories, what wonderful stories to be able to tell. Truly special. We started this podcast with the idea of talking about all sorts of different things, but we've had so much to talk about with your podcast itself, When Home is a Foreign Word. Let me just say to people, listen to it. It is very nice. You do a quick fire round, which is always very amusing. Favorite breakfast? And I replied fruit, which today I had papaya and strawberries. So there you go.
Very nice combination.
Yeah, I think so too, and colourful and everything. But I wanted to also talk, because when we recorded and you on your podcast, and I will of course be promoting that incessantly on social media when it comes out.
Thank you.
My episode. I don't know what you're going to call me. I can't remember.
You have an idea. Had it, but I think I was going to call like something about punk bands. I forgot.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, cool. I like that. Anything with punk is good. But we were talking because we got into the idea of the sort of funny stories around death in Colombia.
Yes.
Because let's not focus on the horrible stories around death in Colombia. There's not like a Nick Cave dirge or something. But there are too many funny stories about it. And I think I mentioned the guy who told me that in the Eje Cafetero, they stole anything, even a hole. And I was like, how does someone steal a hole? And it's because they stole the hole that had been dug for someone in a graveyard and buried their family in it beforehand, their family member. So it was officially stealing a hole. And you got into it and you had all sorts of ones. And I think there's a death story that was told by your grandfather.
Hang on. First of all, I want to say that we said, yes, we're going to talk about death, syphilis, and beyond the grave is a great title.
Yes, I like that. I'm still going to call it
called Coffins, Punk Rock, and the Beauty of Broken Places. Is going to be your episode.
Nice. Death, syphilis, and beyond the grave?
That was the title for this podcast that we're doing now. That was what we said.
So I'm going to call it that.
Because we laughed at my theory about gonorrhea. We'll get back to that.
Death, syphilis, and beyond the stories from beyond the grave.
Yeah.
In Colombia. I'm going to call it that anyway. Stories from beyond.
That's a book right there. And your episode is Coffins, Punk Rock, and the Beauty of Broken Places. So yeah, my grandfather I have, like many people, two grandfathers. I have one that was a lawyer and one that was a veterinary. And they used to joke with each other saying that both of their jobs involved rats and snakes. So my veterinary grandfather was actually the first veterinary to be graduated in Caldas. He wanted to be a doctor, and he got a scholarship by playing basketball. Both of my grandparents, my grandmother and my grandfather, both played basketball. And he got a scholarship, but he couldn't get into medical school because the scholarship was only for veterinary school. So he became the first graduated veterinarian in all of Caldas. And he very quickly began a program of, I'm going to say it the way I think it should be said, mounting stations. And I'm going to explain what that is. So mounting stations were places where wealthy people with very good cattle would take their studs, and then poorer farmers would take their cows, and they would mount their cows for free in order to improve the livestock of the region. And this was like a public service that they would do. And so one day he was on his way up to the mounting station to take the cows to be impregnated by the studs. And he was the doctor. I mean, my grandfather was very tall. He looked like Clint Eastwood. He was very tall, very fair, green eyes. You know, he must have cut quite a figure on his steed, right? And of course he was el doctor. He was a doctor. So everybody like, doctor, you know, you'd think that he was a celebrity. And somebody said, could you please come and look at my cow? My cow has, you know, bowel issues. The cow is stuck. And so my grandfather recently graduated. He said, oh, okay, I'm going to give him a laxative. And he kind of eyeballed the weight of the cow and gave him an amount of the laxative, and then went. And then 3 days later, he came back down the mountain, and he stopped at this farm, and he said, hey, how's the cow? Did the laxative work? And the guy said, oh, it worked really well. He said, oh, okay. And he said, yeah, we're waiting for the cow to stop shitting so we can bury it.
No, there's too much here. It was a suppository laxative, of course, as well, because it's a veterinarian. So I love this. We're waiting for the cow to stop shitting so we can bury it.
Yep, that's how effective the laxative was.
How much did he give it?
I think it was supposed to be like 100 grams per kilo, and he calculated that this cow weighed 500 kilos, and it didn't. It weighed 200. Like he eyeballed it. I mean, this is one of those things where fat shaming killed the cow.
And so the cow was dead, but still shitting.
Yes, they were waiting for the shit to stop coming out so that they could bury the animal, because of course that would have just made for a messy grave.
Now, you've described your dad as well as Clint Eastwood. I can see the spaghetti western with the Juana or the poncho. Yeah. But also, when you say he cut quite a figure, now I'm seeing him as a Mills and Boone character, you know, the romance characters. It was like the blue-eyed man who came over the crest of the hill on his trusty steed and swept the busty, buxom lady off.
Yes, he did, and he recited poetry, and he, said he had a deep knowledge of boleros and recited often. He was a rare man of his time. He was he read English and German. He did postgraduate work. Both of my grandfathers, I'm extremely lucky in that sense. Both of my grandfathers had postgraduate work. They not only were college graduates, they had postgraduate work. My grandfather, the lawyer one, studied in Chile, where he met Salvador Allende, and my grandfather, the veterinary, studied, I think, in Maine, the University of Maine, where he learned a lot about cattle. And he corresponded, and then he became a teacher. Both of them taught. My grandfather, Miguel, who was the veterinary, Miguel Alvarez Jaramillo. He also was the veterinary for the horses for the mounted police, the horses. He was the veterinary for the horses of the police.
You are deeply embedded in the coffee zone with all of these surnames. Alvarez, Jaramillo. I mean, you are deeply... But was there Germanic background in your family? Because, of course...
We have, like a lot of people who look like me, people from the mountain dwellers, the montañeros, right? Proud as the mountains and twice as stubborn. So... we come from one of the waves of the Jewish diaspora. So if you remember the decree, the Alhambra decree in 1490s, coincided with the discovery of the Americas by the Spaniards. Discovery is a mild word. We're not going to go into that right now, but yeah.
There's too much to the...
There's too much. That's just a big can of worms. It's a can of basilisks is what that is. So a lot of Jewish and Sephardic came to the Americas because, their option was you can go to the colonies or you can die. So they came, which was, I'm not sure if it was the lesser evil back then. And they came and they brought coffee with them. If you remember, Colombian coffee is Arabic coffee. It's Variedad Colombia es café arábico. So our coffee came from these people from the Middle East and the northern part of Africa, and that was the first wave of people that came, and so went to the mountains and looked like me. And then in my particular family, we had a second wave of Polish Jews from World War II.
Yeah.
And they also, made sure the gene pool stayed pale. And then on my mother's side, we had for the same reason, we had a batch of Germans coming in from Antioquia. So I have the Antioquia Germans, and then I have the Calda Poles, the Polish people, and all mixed up.
Yeah, you could fit in there as well. I find the diaspora story, especially of Jewish immigrants, fascinating. I've read up much texts on it, many texts. The one I found the best, and I've talked about it several times, is called Quinta Sion by Enrique Martinez, and he details the Ashkenazis, the Sephardics, everything. And he is a guy that grew up, he's the son of a maid who worked in a Jewish household in Fakatativa. And he grew up in the Jewish faith by being exposed to them, and did his doctorate in Tel Aviv. So he grew up celebrating Passover and everything else. But I find this Jewish diaspora so interesting because, of course, I suppose your family's Hispanicized, probably changed names.
We had my grandmother, so my father's mother, who also came from Jewish ancestry, had around her neck, she wore a cross and a Star of David. And one time I asked her, Abuelita, why are you wearing those two things? And she said, I don't want to get to heaven and not be let in because I have the wrong key.
Yeah. Very good.
There's also another book, De los Judíos en la Historia de Colombia, by Daniel Mesa Bernal. I am also Bernal. Yeah. That's a good one too. There's a lot. There's a lot. When we talk about the melting pot, my family is like the burnt bits at the end that you sop up with bread. It's a huge we're a mixed bunch.
Yeah. That's really cool though. It's really interesting indeed. I think this is a whole book. This is a whole other story. I want to go back. Why were we discussing syphilis? That was a segue. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. I do remember because we were talking about curse words and profanity and profane language. Yes. And we were talking about how interesting it is that in Colombia, the word gonorrhea is an insult. For those who don't know, for those listening at home, gonorrhea is an insult. Like, you will get insulted. Somebody will call you.
It's a bad insult.
It's a bad insult. It's not. And
it's not like when you say, you look like to your friend. Like, because it was my favourite swear word. It was probably wanker at the end of it. It's like, but you say that, you can say that to a friend, and he's not going to get in English. He's not going to get offended unless he's too precious about it. But if you shouted gonorrhea at someone, and especially here,
it's on. It's on.
Yeah.
Gloves are off, and it's not that you have gonorrhea; it's that you are a gonorrhea.
Which is even worse when you think of the image.
It's very bad, and of course, Colombians use multipliers in our insults.
Yes.
So we like to, you're not just a gonorrhea, you're a triple gonorrhea.
Yeah, so you're triple gonorrhea.
It's a tetra hijo de puta. Like, you have to, it's a multiplier because, of course, there's nothing that makes you more angry than math. So if you combine math with insults, you've really got something there. And
can you imagine a triple case of gonorrhea?
I mean, that's gotta itch. So
I'm glad we're talking about this now.
My theory about it was that syphilis is local. Syphilis is an American disease of the Americas, not the Americans, but like, it came from this continent. It's ours. It's endemic.
Be careful.
Yes.
It's ours. You can't take it from us.
No, it's ours. And, when the Spaniards came, when the Europeans came, and they brought with them, gunpowder and slavery and and gonorrhea, we hit back with tobacco and cocaine and syphilis. And so in my world, this is speculative etymology. This is just me. I think that the reason gonorrhea is an insult and syphilis isn't is because gonorrhea would have to have been gotten by, you had to get it from a foreigner, at least in the beginning. And that meant that you betrayed your people. That meant that you were a traitor. And so it's a way of not just saying, because the way we use it, you're a gonorrhea, you're a traitor, you are the worst scum of the earth. And I think it's because of that. I think it's because it was a disease that is associated with being with the enemy, with being with a foreigner, with being with an outsider, in a time in which that was very much seen as wrong and bad because you were consorting with the enemy.
I love it.
And even if it isn't
true, even if it isn't true, I think we should bring it into regular conversation and into the public domain. Yeah.
Let's make it
things that
speculative linguistics. We're opening up a new thing of speculative linguistics.
I can't bring that into the title; it's too much. But there are so many things. I love this. I love that we were talking about this gonorrhea.
And the reason we were talking about that was because the things about death that happened, the absurdity, again, because I was telling you that I think that our imagination and magical realism, because we spoke about Garcia Marquez in that one too, that I think that magical realism and in general, the Colombian proclivity to believe in magic and to believe in superstition was our way to use our imaginations to make our horrible reality a little bit more palatable, if you will. It's a difficult reality that we live in, and I find that the places that have the most violence usually have the most creativity, because I think there's a direct link between creativity and difficulty, because you don't need to be creative when everything is given to you. You don't need to be creative when everything is easy, because creativity is a necessity, and imagination is what makes the process of the unimaginable, possible, because we need stories to understand what's going on. In fact, the difference on a neurological level, the difference between fear and panic is narration. So as long as you're able to tell yourself what's going on, you will never panic. When you start to panic, it's when words fail you, when you cannot describe, when you don't have the language to tell yourself, let alone someone else, what's going on. That's when you start to panic. As long as you're able to tell yourself, okay, it's an earthquake, I need to evacuate, you're going to be fine. But there are moments in your life where you're like, I don't have the language for this. I don't have the words. I cannot express what's going on. Pain that lies too deep for words. And so we come up with metaphors and we come up with magical realism, and death is no different from that. So death in Colombia is as absurd as everything else. And I was telling you that, since my mother died, such ridiculous things have happened. Like the amount of paperwork and the amount of bureaucracy and just the amount of ridiculousness where somebody dies and you get a receipt. So this is how it happens. Someone dies in a hospital and they give you a receipt for the body. And with that receipt, you then have to go to the person who picks up the body to take them to the morgue. And then you get another receipt from the morgue. And then with this receipt, you have to go to pay to the hospital so that they will release it. So then now you have the receipt of the person who died and the receipt that you paid for their care. And then with these receipts, you have to go to the other person, and then they take them. In my mother's case, we had her cremated, and you get a receipt for the cremation. And then you need all of these receipts because you also need to have a register, el registro civil, which is different from el registro de muerte, and that this is different from, and you need to have all these papers. And so you need to have it, by the way, every month you need it to collect the pension, the survivor's pension. Like, she's not less dead today than she was a month ago. Like, what is going on? And so you call the bank and you say, hi, I'm calling because my mother died and I need to know if she had an insurance, and they'll tell you that information can only be given to the title holder. Like, do you understand the words that are coming out of your mouth? Well, my mother had this seed, she had a bank thing, and like, no, but we can only give it to the person. Like, it's so ridiculous. Yeah. It's so ridiculous.
Do I have to wheel her in?
No, at one point I started carrying around a pin with a Ouija board. There's a Ouija board on my lapel, and I would whip it out and say, do you want to call her or should I? Like, what do I actually need for this ritual? Because she's going to be pissed. If I call her now, she's going to be pissed, and I don't know how to put her back. And people don't laugh when I say that. But I'm like, do you understand the ridiculousness, the absurdity? We had when my grandmother died, she had a subscription. She died in 1996, so this was back when there was these things called magazines.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I wrote for one, and she had a subscription, and so I had to type out the cancellation because they had those little in the back. There was like a little coupon to cancel the subscription or to pay for next month's subscription. And in my scrawny handwriting, I said motive of cancellation, death. And we got a letter back in the mail, very nice letter, that said, "Dear Pepita, we noticed that you canceled your subscription because you have died. If this situation should change, we would like to offer you a 35% discount to renew your subscription with us." It's like 35% is a good discount. Not enough to wake the dead, but like not enough for a resurrection, though.
I love that you can really see the humor in this. I love that you can see that because it's so great. When you say things like, well, she's no less dead today than she was the other day. I immediately thought of the movie The Princess Bride and the person being mostly dead.
Mostly dead.
Mostly dead. Yes, he's mostly dead. But Carrie Elwes, that's right, was mostly dead. There's too much here. I was thinking, and you brought in the whole creativity. There was so much in that which I love. There's the creativity coming out of hardship, and therefore Colombia obviously being a major, I would say, sancocho of creativity, if we're going to put it into Colombian terms. And that brings me back to the title that you've given your episode for me with the punk rock in there, is that I genuinely believe that punk rock was, a different avenue of creativity, not a breath of fresh air, but more like bad breath, coming out through serious economic and social hardship in the UK and a rejection of the norms. And I think that there's a lot of truth out of that. And I think when we look back further down the line at the period of COVID, the creativity, art in every sense, will reflect, of course, this as well. I think we could talk for hours because you've got awesome stories and I love them, and I don't want to take all of your grist for the mill for your next book because this is clearly all being written down, hopefully.
Well, I started writing a novel. Actually, I finished it last week. I started writing it when my mother was in the hospital, and it is about a young woman whose mother is dying, and she discovers after her mother died that she's a witch, and so it's
well, you are one, aren't you? You mentioned that in our last episode. You said people have suggested.
It's a bit pretentious to call myself a witch. I do dabble. I think that here's where I stand on that. I'm an atheist, and I'm not. I don't beat around the bush about it. But I do think that I've seen too much to think that there's nothing. I haven't seen enough to know what that is.
I think that's fair.
I've seen weird stuff. The fact that I can't explain it doesn't mean that no one can. It doesn't mean that it's inexplicable. It just means that I don't have an explanation for a lot of the things that have happened. I went deep into quantum physics writing this book. It's a book about grief and magic that stemmed from my own grief and my own desire that magic existed. So it's about grief and magic. I just sent it to my agent, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. Publication is weird and it takes a long time. Yes. But I do write about my experiences and I tell stories from and about Colombia, and it's all there for the taking because Colombia is ripe with stories and people that need to tell them.
Yeah, it's true. It's too much true. I don't see any better moment than to bring us to a close on that, because, again, I think we could do a multi-part episode all about this. I just think it's been the most rewarding and just a truly enjoyable conversation because I don't know if you're opening up or if these are stories that you have set for your dinner parties or lunches with friends, and they're oft repeated. It just feels so natural, and for that reason, I say thank you so much for sharing with us.
No, it was opening. I don't have. This is not my repertoire. This was not my stand-up.
So okay, because I end up repeating myself a lot, but you've got too much information and too much to talk about. I think I feel flattered and a little unnerved by all of this. A little overwhelmed. Angela, where can we find your podcast when home is a foreign word?
It is available wherever you get your podcasts. It's on Spotify and on Podbean. It's everywhere.
Okay.
I have a page for it on Facebook. With the same name, and I have an email, when home is a foreign word @gmail.com, in case you know people that want to nominate themselves to be interviewed. They can also write me there.
I'm on TikTok. Plenty of people. Oh.
Please, I want all their stories. I'm thinking of doing one in Spanish called La Coleccionista de Historias, just to collect the stories of the people that I know, because I think that there's so many stories out there, particularly women, that don't get asked and don't have a chance to say things. So I'm on that. I'm on TikTok. I'm everywhere. Hopefully, and coming to a bookshelf near you at some point.
All right. Well, yeah. If it doesn't work out with your agent, I'm publishing books.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There you go. Oh, we should do. No, but my agent is in English. We should do things in Spanish.
All right. Perfect.
This is the easiest pitch ever.
Yeah. No, I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for this. If I like it, if I like the context, I don't think about the sales return. I just think about just getting the book out there.
Well, actually, I think I'm gonna throw my friend Vincent under the bus here, but we had an idea for a collection of stories of just the mundanity of the absurd in Colombia.
Oh, I know. I'm 100% behind that. If you want to do a collection of stories of that, I will have stories for it, and I'd gladly. So long as I make my money back, I'm a happy man. That's all. That's all.
There's money to be made in absurdity.
Oh, there's too much. Well, Vincent, I'll be getting in touch. Angela, thank you so much. Check it out on Facebook. The email, as you said, I'll put these all onto our social media. I am not on TikTok. I'm too old for TikTok. Which means you are younger than I, because I'm too old for TikTok. We've been talking to Angela Alvarez. Stop talking. We'll keep going. Thank you so much. Please listen to When Home is a Foreign Word, because it really is very good, and you will have got just a tiny snippet, a soupçon of what Angela is like to speak to and to listen to. It is a real joy, and I wish you all the best with everything, and I want to read the script, the document, when it's allowed to be read, and I will, of course, review and praise you for this work, and one day we'll meet in person. Yes. One day we'll meet in person.
Bring the kids, bring the wife. Let's order a pizza.
Oh yeah. Oh, that will bring them all over. So thank you again. Oh, come here. Bring your kids, exactly. Bring your son. Bring your husband. Bring everyone. Bring the Ouija board. No, my wife wouldn't like that. She wouldn't like that. But anyhow, that's another story. Let's not get into that. That's for another podcast. I've been Richard Mccoll here for the Colombia Calling podcast, talking to Angela Alvarez, writer, journalist, conversationalist, podcaster, an all-round great, amazing person. Thank you, everyone, to listen. If you want to support us, it's patreon.com/Colombia Calling. It's for a price of a coffee per month. You can support the Colombia Calling podcast. And now we'll go over to some messages as well from our sponsors. So don't go away.